Alright, so I wanted to make a really quick demo about just like how to do, if maybe you wanted like a piece of cloth or something attached to a character. In this case, I'm going to try doing like an end cloth skirt, and this is not going to be a nice looking cloth, just for the record. I just want to show you like how you might go about setting something like this up. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you have, some kind of skirt or geometry or like whatever in place before you start animating. Oof. So I have this like crappy looking little skirt. And I'm basically just trying to set this up so it's kind of attached where I would want it on the body. I'm not being overly cautious with this, but just try to make sure that it's not clipping through any areas, because that will cause issues later. But I'm just going to say for now this is fine enough. So the first thing actually I should mention is that you should not be doing this in the file where your animation is doing. You should be doing this in your base rig file, and then referencing that into your animation, but I have the animation here, and it was just sort of a throwaway thing, so I don't actually have the rig referenced in, which is why I'm doing it here. So what I'm going to show you is basically how to, again, do this if you've set up your animation kind of incorrectly. But the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and go into our FX menu, end cloth, and just create an end cloth with this. And you'll notice that I have the frame range set to -10. This is very, very slowly starting to sort of drop down, but obviously the legs are walking out of it, so there's clearly a few issues with this. I also should note that if you want a nice looking end cloth sim, you would need way more polys than this. This is, I think, the limit of what my computer could sim and also record at the same time. Okay, so normally to set this up, you would go back maybe -300 frames, set up your skirt, and then, or whatever article of clothing, and then sim it so that it's laying flat. What you don't want to see is like the very beginning of a sim, where like if you're dropping a tablecloth or something like that, the tablecloth is like still flopping and like in the process of being dropped, basically. You want the skirt to look like it was always laying flat on the person, basically, rather than like halfway blown up crazy and sticking out all weird. Alright, so the first thing that I want to do, there's a weird description. The first thing I want to do is go around and basically anchor the skirt as if we're just going to imagine this is like, some kind of elastic band. If this is a robot character, you could add some kind of like little metal thing or something to make it look like it was attached. So we grab all the vertices on the top. And actually, you know what, I'm going to try something like kind of different. So I did this tutorial before, it's like behaving really weird, so I'm actually going to try doing the faces. And just do a transform constraint. And now, if we play this, so the body is still going to walk out of it, but the skirt itself is at least not doing anything super crazy, where it's not falling aimlessly through the air. It didn't really look like it was doing anything, but I think if we were to turn down like stretch resistance, that's usually my go-to of, is my sim working? You just aggressively turn down stretch resistance and it'll usually start oozing, basically. So you can turn down stretch resistance, so we know the sim is actually working. That's fine and dandy. The other thing that I should do, that I should have done, and I didn't because I forgot, is if you go into your nucleus, you do want to set the start frame of this. Like if we're trying to start this before the animation starts, you need to make sure, my cat is like on my keyboard, you need to make sure that the start frame is actually set to the frame that you want and not 1. So now if we do this, we should see the sim start. It's oozing before the animation starts, and that's what we want to see here. Minus the oozing because it looks stupid, but whatever. Alright, so to make the skirt actually follow the body, I'm just going to grab the control for the hip and then grab the dynamic curve. This little dynamic constraint. And I'm just going to go ahead and do a parent constraint on that, so it should carry it along with it. Oof. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and do this and just sort of see what happens. And you can see, so the body is still walking out of it, and that's fine. Turning stretch resistance off very clearly broke some stuff. I do not really ever recommend turning stretch resistance down as low as I just set it. And by as low, I mean at 0, literal 0. But you can see that now we have a little bit, like, where the skirt is at least trying to follow the rest of the body. And the issue I had with the last one is pretty much what's happening here, a little bit less crazily so, but like the skirt basically ends up like flying up into the air. I'm still not entirely sure what's causing that. I think that would just be something that I kind of have to look into, but I'm going to go over maybe some theoretical ways to try to maybe fix that at the end of this. But I want to get the skirt sort of set up and pseudo working first. So the next thing we want to do is obviously it's weird to have a skirt that clips shamelessly through your body. So just grab any piece of geometry that the skirt will be interacting with. So definitely like the parts of the body, if you're going to have your character in a chair, anything like that, they should be interactables basically. So you want to grab them and just do create passive collider. And now when we go ahead and we play this, we should get the skirt actually interacting with the legs and being all nice, and you know, the sim still looks really stupid and is obviously a crazy looking skirt that is just Marilyn Monroeing casually for no apparent reason at the end, but it is at least interacting with the body. So there's a few things that could potentially help fix this. One of them, honestly, is just having more geometry, but I'm going to show you a few maybe hacky things that can kind of maybe possibly help. And this one I don't necessarily recommend, but like sometimes it's interesting to try, and that is basically setting the gravity really, really high so that theoretically it would be harder for this skirt to flail up into the air all crazy. And in this case, doesn't seem to be fixing anything. It seems like it's still going to kind of pull itself up at the end. It is slightly better, actually. Kind of, sort of. I feel like what's actually happening with this, because this looks a little bit like what happens when an end cloth kind of like explodes. I think there's probably two issues with this. One, my scene maybe is not made to scale, so some of these values are like a little bit off in terms of like what they should be. Also, if end cloth ends up clipping through itself, it does really weird stuff. So like, let's just sort of isolate select this and see if there's any areas. Really? Okay, that's rude. See if there's any areas in this where it looks like it's clipping through itself, because if it is, it actually looks, there's like some clipping here. That could also be the issue. So there's one thing you can try that sometimes helps, which is turning on for here we go, self-collision flag. Having this set to vertex, it might be worth, this will make your sim take longer, but it might be worth setting to full surface, because basically what that is saying it's only registering like if the vertex is colliding with itself, whereas full surface, you can see it's definitely simming slower, but it's giving basically more information to the cloth to help it prevent clipping into itself. And it seems like it is actually behaving a little bit nicer in this instance, where it looks like it's still probably going to end up flying up, but maybe we'll get a little bit farther before it does. And actually, wait for it. Okay, no, it's still getting pulled up there. I just got excited because it was taking longer because the sim is taking longer. Sigh. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just set this back to maybe like vertex face is going to be a little bit faster. You could, I don't recommend this option, but you could try turning off self-collide, which basically means the fabric won't interact with itself. Downside of this is obviously that the fabric will totally just clip through itself, and you can see it's bunching up really badly, so I don't recommend that as an option. It also, in this instance, very much doesn't fix the issue. So, like I said, don't recommend that. So what you can do, theoretically, is try and just kind of like mess with some of these settings. Ew! Cat just sneezed snot on me, sorry. That was very gross. So sometimes maybe you could try increasing the mass of the skirt. That basically just kind of makes the cloth heavier. But like I said, in this case, I think what's happening is the cloth is having issues where it ends up clipping itself, and this actually seems to make it worse. Or does it? Question mark. We'll see. Wahaha. Okay, so actually, weird. Making it heavier does actually help here. So I think that actually, oddly enough, might have been the issue for clearly not all of this, but maybe most of it, or at least part of it, because that is definitely behaving more like a skirt. I'm going to go ahead and smooth that so it just looks a little bit less terrible. So the other thing that you can do is mess a little bit with like the stretch and compression resistance. Bend resistance will make this a little bit stiffer. So like I said, I'm not going to go through all these. I'm just going to kind of play with this a little bit so you can see like maybe some of the settings that maybe helped in this particular instance. So I usually think of bend resistance is going to make something that looks maybe, I'm not going to say like leather, but like maybe a little bit more of like a thicker, stiffer material. The other thing that I might try just for fun is adding a little bit of, maybe like, you can see there's like definitely a lot less sort of rippling effect in this. Oof. The other thing you can do is sometimes you will need to key these throughout your animation to get the values you want. It's super crazy rare to be able to just like set a value for everything and like have it be perfect and like work perfectly. But one thing you can try for funsies is turning, this is going to be entirely unrealistic, but I'm basically turning on wind blowing straight downwards just to see what happens. So if you wanted to do the Marilyn Monroe effect, you could do, and you can see that's actually maybe giving a little bit more, wind a lot of times will add some cool sort of like ripples into stuff. But if you wanted to do the Marilyn Monroe effect, you would set this to 1 and then like turn it up really suddenly. So basically it would just blow really aggressively upwards, and it should shoot the skirt up. So that actually, I'm not going to say this is like the best solution to anything. Certainly is still behaving really stupidly at the end, but the wind theoretically maybe could possibly help to push the skirt down. And in this case, that doesn't really seem to be what's happening. I think this is actually just some weird sort of like clipping mesh stuff that's going on. Let's see what happens if I set the gravity up to 100 like a crazy person. So that was basically the tutorial. I am kind of just playing with it at this point because I like end cloth. But this would also work with stuff like ties if you wanted to. It's the same principle basically, where you would tether the little knot onto the character and then just like have the bottom kind of draping around. And something like a tie, you could definitely get away with less geometry because they don't really bend. They don't really have like ripply, you know, skirts or anything like that. They're just sort of floppy bits of fabric. So that should sim a lot faster. I think I mentioned this before, but it also, setting the gravity down to 100 did seem to sort of help. So like I said, it's not a thing I recommend. I feel like my scene is a little bit not to scale. And that will definitely affect how the sims look. So what happens if I do 500 and I also turn off wind speed? And I should note that anytime you want to do a sim, you should restart this. Also see the video on caching if you're going to do anything like this, because without caching you will cry. But yeah, so like I said, this is by no means the best, you know, skirt sim ever. It's just sort of like a really rough way to get something kind of skirt-like in. I do think this would also be easier to manage with something maybe like a cape, rather than a skirt which is, you know, being pulled in all crazy directions by the legs and that kind of thing. I feel like it just maybe needs, I think it just needs some settings in like the skirt, because this is it's definitely falling faster. So I think maybe what it needs is just a little bit more something here. I'm gonna make it let's make it a little bit more rigid and see what happens. Actually, let's make it extremely rigid. If I'm ever trying to figure out what a setting does, I'm just like, let's make it max the setting out. Let's do it. So this is actually probably would help a little bit, because I mean, this is obviously very much overdone. This looks insane, but it does seem like rigidity might help a little bit, where it would be a little bit less flowy. Because I think part of the fact, like the flow and the ripples is like what's to a certain extent causing this to be a little bit sort of on the spazzier side, I guess, of the sim. So we could try maybe turning that up a little bit, and you can see that now we're getting something that it definitely feels a little bit odd. It's not what I would describe as a realistic sim, but it's also a little bit more controlled in the way it's moving, where it does definitely feel like some kind of crazy, like, stiffer cloth. So maybe what if we set this to, like, 0.1 or something like that? I said 0.1, dang it. Not 1. Oh, squishy cat. But yeah, so I mean, that might be a thing to play with. You could also look at, there's a setting somewhere for damping. But dampening or drag, I actually don't remember which. But it seems like adding a little bit of rigidity kind of helps here, where the skirt is still, it looks a little bit weird still. But it's definitely kind of better than it was before. So I'm actually going to run a play blast of this just to see what this looks like in real time, because I'm frankly just curious. Blah, 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 scale, fine, good, cool. And like I said, you should look into the caching video, because you would want to cache this, so then you can animate from whatever frames you want without having to like redo your whole sim every time. But yeah, so hopefully this was sort of helpful. Like I said, this was more of a sort of rough, just this is a thing that you could theoretically do if you wanted to. But yeah. It also, deform resistance might also be a good setting to look into. It's similar to rigidity, it just kind of like is a different way of calculating and looking at sort of staying in place. And then again, the mass, lift, and drag are also good things to look at, where the mass is kind of like the weight or density, I guess, of the object. And then drag, a lot of times, sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but it kind of like helps slow down or like calm down the sim sometimes. So let's see what we have. I imagine this is going to be terrible looking. Yeah, so I mean that looks really, that's like a jello skirt. But I mean you get the idea. I should also just, again, I have other videos on like how to set up end cloth and like a little bit more on the settings, but the play blasting is the only way to get the actual timing of the skirt and figure out what that looks like. So do make sure that you play blast occasionally. And if your sim, excuse me, if your sim is taking a long time, I don't know what my voice is doing. If your sim is taking a long time, a lot of times I will just play blast it, because it takes basically the same amount of time to play blast as it does to, there we go, to just scrub through in the timeliner, and then at least you have the view, like the real-time view of things. Yeah, so I don't know if I would necessarily recommend rigidity. That looks pretty insane. But, you know, that's end cloth. So that's pretty much it. I am gonna, just because I like doing end cloth stuff, I'm gonna play with the settings a little bit more and see if I can make them a little bit less crazy. So if you want to hang around for that, feel free. But there is no more probably useful content in this, unless I figure out maybe some kind of magical setting to help fix things. Okay, let's try deform resistance. Yeah, it's pretty much what I expected that to do, more or less. Input motion drag. Let's see what this does. Oh, that actually looks kind of significantly better. So input motion drag seemed kind of nice. Seems like a fun setting there. Let's see what happens if I turn it up higher. Hahaha. I'm also not gonna lie, I actually don't know what a lot of these settings do. I just sort of go through and I'm like, let's see what this does, haha, and I'll turn it up really high, and then if you do this enough, you kind of get a sense of like what the, you know, what they do and how they'll affect your sim, even if you don't know exactly what the calculation it's doing is. It kind of looks better-ish. Ish. Okay, let's see what happens maybe if I turn drag up from 0.05. Yeah, so I do feel like drag is kind of good at like calming down a sim, basically, where it'll just not, it'll kind of like slow it down. I mean, in this case, it's actually making a really gross effect where it looks like the character's being hit with wind, so I don't think that this is the setting that I was hoping it was. I'm going to try to make this heavier and see what that does. And then restitution angle, I think, is also something that would be good to look at, as well as probably shear resistance. I think that might be the... Actually, it's so annoying. A lot of these I'm like, it's like I know what it does, but I don't know how to like explain what it does. It's like a weird sort of strange thing because I've worked with fabric before. Let's see what happens if I take this up. That's also really weird looking and gross. Okay, so maybe... okay, what happens if I do... Hello. Hello, Broken Sim. Oh my. Oh my. What the heck have I done to this? Alright, I'm gonna go back and just set this back to the settings that it was previously. Because clearly I don't know what those settings do. Let's see here. Oh, whoops, I'm an idiot. I was looking, damp is the setting that I was looking for. So you can use these to dampen the stretching and the sort of overall animation. So let's see what this gives me. Oof. Okay. So I don't think shear resistance did what I thought it did either. Because that, I think, is making stuff pretty weird looking. Not gonna lie. Oh my god, what have I done to this? Is this just mass? Like, is it? I feel like maybe I've just made this too heavy. I very much don't like how it's just sort of conforming so aggressively to the leg there. Like, that looks really bizarre to me. And then the back is like staying, so I think I need to turn damping down. Because I could be wrong. Who knows? Alright, let's see. Let's just see what turning drag up really high does. I know I did that, and I forgot what it did. I don't think I really like drag being super high. Let's see what tangential drag does. I have absolutely no idea what the setting is. I don't think that makes anything significantly worse, but it also doesn't necessarily fix any of the stuff I was trying to fix. Yeah. Tangential drag. Alright, so let's see what happens if I maybe turn on maybe a little bit more stretch resistance, maybe some bend resistance, just to see if maybe that'll... I think bend resistance is one of those things that gets... Yeah, that'll make it like a really... Actually... kind of. I like bend resistance. I think that does. This is actually closer to what I was looking for. So they're really high. Okay, so that will also get rid of a lot of the little ripples in the fabric. And I think what I'm really trying to eliminate here is just this, quite frankly, god-awful weird thing jutting out of, like, the back of the character for no apparent reason. That, I don't know what that is. So definitely set bend resistance up a little bit too high. What if I maybe just try it with something like 20? Turn up compression resistance. So compression resistance is, I believe, like, basically if you were to, like, drop a piece of cloth, like, onto the ground, like, would it crumple, or would it behave like a piece of paper where it sort of, like, folds and then, like, slides down in, like, a single unit, if that makes sense. Anywho, so this is, kind of going nowhere fast, so I think I'm just gonna kind of, like, end this madness. Just for fun, I'm gonna turn down stretch resistance by a lot, and it's probably gonna give us, like, a very bouncy look on this skirt. But it's fun. I like turning down. I like setting settings really low and seeing how it breaks things. Also, if this works, I'm gonna be really salty if this is, like, the thing that fixes it, me jokingly setting down stretch resistance. I will be angry about that. Ooh, that knee. That makes sense. I swear to God, is this the thing that's gonna fix it? No, okay, it's still doing it. Kind of happy about that, but also annoyed. Anywho. So yeah, I think that's pretty much as far as I'm gonna go with this. There's really no point in going crazy. It was just kind of like a random test demo. A lot of end cloth is just sort of figuring out what the settings do. And like I said, making sure that you modeled stuff to scale does help considerably. So definitely model to scale.